Ready to rock and roll. Gaming, yes! I've waited so long for this. Board gaming, here we come. Let's get the car started. Okay. What's wrong? The engine. It's not starting. Okay, I'm gonna check under the bonnet. I can handle this. Can you see what the problem is?
Your battery's definitely flat.
I think I may have a solution. I'm gonna power your battery up using some much needed yellow electric dye, and that should be enough electrical dice to power the battery. That will then start the motor and be enough to power the engine, creating red heat dice. I'm gonna pay some cog and vent these dice so I can remove them and then gain some blue dice. I'm pretty sure that's not how car engines work. Colored dice do not power car engines. Just give it a go. Trust me. Okay. Whoa. And where did you learn to do that? I learned it from playing Steampunk Rally to gaming. It is the turn of the 20th century where famous inventors and scientists from all across the world are uncovering the secrets of steam-powered, heat-powered, and electrical-powered energy. They're using it to create and power their mechanical machines. Steampunk Rally is a racing, car drafting, dice management game that allows players to choose an inventor, create machines, and pit them in a race across the Swiss Alps. Today I'll be giving you a slight and quick overview of the gameplay and the pros and cons of this board game. Get your engines ready. On your marks, get set, go! Steampunk Rally is a game designed by Orin Bishop. It began as a Kickstarter project on Kickstarter.com. It's for 2 to 8 players. It takes about 60 minutes per game and is for ages 14 and over. Setting up a game of Steampunk Rally is pretty easy. What you need to do is start with your first piece of your customizable racetrack. Notice that this is the start tile and it's double-sided. One is the Hovedrome and one is the Swiss Alps. You also need to get the finish line, and at the finish line you also need to get the extended piece at the end that comes after the finish line, because in this game the winner is not the first person to cross the finish line, but the person who can get furthest past the finish line after the final round has been triggered. You then need to choose randomly 3 different tiles, attach the pieces together to create a racetrack. You'll notice that because these pieces are quite different from each other, you'll get a different racetrack each time. So you can see there is our racetrack for this particular round. Now the game comes with about 16 inventors, ranging from Sakishi Toyota to Mary Curie to Nikola Tesla to Alexander Graham Bell. And what players need to do is to choose an inventor, the 2 starting engine cards, and they also need to take the little pawn matching to their inventor and place it on the starting line on the racetrack. Each inventor has its particular flavor and theme. So that's Nikola Tesla, uses a lot of electrical energy cubes, and uses an induction motor to create movement in the game. With Alexander Graham Bell, you can see that with his, he uses heat dice as well to generate movement, and he also, in his core engine, is able to generate both heat dice, cogs, or electrical energy. So in front of each player will need a reminder or player aid card. They will need to place a light bulb token, which is set to the on side. Each player will also need a damage wheel, and it needs to be set to 0, ready to start the beginning of the game. Then, using their starter engine cards, they need to connect the engines together so it makes a complete valve. Now, there's a few rules with these valves. Every engine part must be connected by a valve, and all of the engine parts that are created in your machine must be able to be traced back to the cockpit engine. So when you're building this, it's really important to keep in mind how many valves you have left open and what positions those valves are in. Finally, you'll need to flip the turn play token to see which direction the players will be drafting their cards in. If you're playing with only 2 players, this token is not necessary. Now at the end of each round, you'll then flip the token over and change the direction in which players are going to be drafting. The board game comes with 4 separate decks. The first deck is the gold deck for generating movement. Then you've got the silver deck for generating more power or more dice. And then you've got the copper deck for expanding your machine. As you can see, the copper cards have 4 open valves, whereas some of these other cards only have 1 open valve. Finally, you've got the boost card deck, and the boost card decks are used to interact with the other races. Each round consists of 4 phases. In each phase, players complete their play simultaneously. The phases are the draft phase, the vent phase, the race phase, and the damage phase. On the very first round that you play this game, all players will be skipping the first vent phase. Draft phase, each player takes 1 card from the top of each pile, so that they have 1 gold card, 1 silver card, 1 copper card, and 1 boost card. And what they have to do on this particular phase is they have to select or declare one of a few actions. They either construct a machine part, get dice, get cogs, or store boost cards secretly under their damage dial. Once they have chosen a card, the rest are passed on in the direction of the turn marker. So what I would do here is I would look for which card I would like to use first that would go well with the theme I've got. So Sakishi Toyota is steam powered. This particular card here is quite good. Now I've got to see if there's an open valve that matches, and it does. And what that engine card will allow me to do is to generate more power because it's a silver card, and in this case I get to generate more electrical dice. So the game, even though it's all about the racing, it's also really about powering those engines and designing those machines. Once I've chosen my action and declared it, I then take my 3 leftover cards and pass it in the direction of the turn markers. And the next player gives me their hand of 3 cards. I have a look and see what the cards are. Okay, and I see which one I like. And in this case, I really like this boost card, so I'm actually going to keep it. Now, with the boost card, you actually put it face down underneath your dial, and you use it at any time, except where it's specified. So, for example, on this particular card, it says playable during the vent phase only. The other thing I can do during the drafting phase is discard one of these cards to get the colored dice shown in the top right hand corner, or I can discard the card and get the number of cogs also shown in the right hand corner. The dice gets placed to the side, and I'll use these in the race phase. The venting phase begins in the second round of the game, and that's because in the first round, none of the players should have any dice on their machines. Now, once a die is placed on a machine, that die can't be used again to create that same effect. So, in order to remove a die from the machine, it's kind of like the exhaust from an exhaust pipe from your car. You need to pay 1 cog to reduce any certain number of die by 2 pips. So for example, I could remove this one off the board because that was 2. for every cog that you pay, and that space left over can then be used again with another die in the race phase, which is coming up. Another way you can vent is to pay 1 cog to then reduce 1 pip off each of the die. Now, for the purposes of explaining the race phase, I've just changed my card that I had before with this card up here, and I'll tell you why. Because in the race phase, one of the actions that you can do is to use your light bulb, and you can only use it once. If I choose to use my light bulb, I turn my light bulb off, and then every card that has a light bulb icon on it has a particular effect. So this particular light bulb card creates 1 red heat die. And in my main cockpit engine, my light bulb card allows me to choose either a heat die, a shield, or 2 cogs. In the race phase, I take the dice that I got from the drafting phase, I roll them and put them together. Now, if I'm not really happy with the numbers that I've got, I can actually pay a cog to either re-roll or to increase one of the dice by 1. Once you've rolled your dice, you can then take your dice and place it in an empty space on your machine and then activate some of your machine parts. This particular space here has the number 3, and because I've got the number 6 on my dice, I can use this action twice. This action symbol here means to take 2 movement spaces on the racetrack, so like this. Now, if your vehicle goes through a race space where it's got a mountain with a number in it, you actually have to take that much damage on your damage wheel. So if I landed on that mountain space with 1, I'd take 1 damage. The final phase is the damage phase. If your dial is below 0, you need to remove that many parts to get it back to 0, and then take that many parts off your machine. Once the round is over, all players should have their damage dials at 0, and then we turn over the order marker and flip back the light bulb token to the on position. Now, if you're ever confused about the iconography in the game, the player aid card is excellent. Now, the winner of the game is not the first person to cross the finish line. The first person to cross the finish line actually triggers the last round. And in the last round, all of the competitors get 1 more turn to draft, to vent, to race, and to take damage, and whichever player is furthest beyond the finish line at the end of that round is actually the winner. I just wanted to show everyone just what makes this game so amazing. Not only is the artwork so rich and detailed, but the game cards itself can be customized to create any sort of machine that your imagination desires. And you can see this is just an example of one of the machines that I made quickly. So you can see how the copper cards are really important for expanding the size of your machine. You've got these gold cards which allow or provide your machine ability to move. And then you've got the silver cards, which I haven't used, but I can use one here, which is used to generate more dice. Now, what's also really quite good about this game is the different combos that you can get when you power your machine. So the race phase is actually my favorite phase because you actually really get to see how well your cards work together and whether there's synergy between the way you've constructed your machine and the way your engine is powered, and whether that equates to a lot of movement on the actual game board itself. If I had this collection of dice which I obtained during my drafting phase, I could use my dice here. That would give me a yellow dice for free. I could then use my yellow dice and then place it in here for movement. Use this blue dice to then create more movement, but I need a value of 4. So what I should have done was take this one here. That is 6. So it doesn't matter if you're equal or above it, you just can't be below it. You need to have a number equal or above in order to use that movement. What I can do is take one of my remaining dice and place it on here to then select either movement and removal of a die, or I can take a shield and removal of a die. In this case, I'm actually going to remove this die off again. And because I have some dice left over for my drafting phase, I can actually reuse that and get that same effect again. Because I've got all these other dice left over, the more parts that I have, the more interesting combinations you can get. I can place these 2 die here, or just 1 dice, and pay for 4 to get 2 movement. However, the negative effect of using the rocket boosters is that you take 1 shield of damage. Interaction between players in this game is done in 2 different ways. The first way is in the drafting phase, where players can choose to block other players' choices by discarding a card that a player to their left or right might want. So that involves observing what other players are creating in front of them. And the other way is to use these wonderful boost cards. Now, this boost card can only be used in the vent phase, as it says in this text box, and same with this card, the Greek Fire card, where you can remove a red die from your machine, but also you can take a red die from the supply and then put it on any space, which then creates 2 extra damage for any player that moves through that space. So that's a pretty good card, especially during the late game phase, or when you can see that there's a player who's about to do a lot of damage. The rules in Steampunk Rally are very, very well written. The rulebook is very, very clear. It's got some great images about how to take your turns. It's written sequentially with each of the phases outlined in a very, very clear fashion. Not only have you got that, you've got actually some rich text that appears at the bottom of each page that outlines a little bit of background information to each of the inventors. So the board game instruction manual is actually quite thematic. And I love reading about each of the scientists and inventors because it kind of influenced my choice of who I was going to choose for a particular game. There's a few little side notes about the rules. There are a few amendments to the rules, and you can actually download this off Board Game Geek and the official Steampunk Rally website, or Roxley Games, the publisher. It changes some of the rules in the game just to make the gameplay a little bit smoother. So, for example, as I mentioned at the beginning, you don't play the vent phase in the first round of the game because it just doesn't make sense. The other thing that changes is the light bulb rule. Whenever you flick the light bulb switch on, all of the cards that you have in front of you that have a light bulb on it are actually activated. On the challenge spaces and tiles, in the original rules, you were able to take the benefit of the effects of each of the tiles as you pass through them, but actually now you can only get the benefit of that challenge tile effect if you land on it. So you still take damage if you go through a mountain. There are 2 exceptions to that rule, however. On the Hovedrome side, you can take the effect of the crowd, and the other challenge space that does not apply to that rule is the glacier space. Now, there is one amendment to one of the cards in the game. You need to check the website for a little bit more detail, or Board Game Geek. The change has been made to the blast pipe card. The steam dice space that you can see here has actually been replaced with a light bulb icon. And this occurred because someone managed to create a perpetual motion machine during the gameplay just by chance in combination with a few of the other cards. So what you need to do is go to the website, download the new version of the card. Steampunk Rally is an excellent 2-player game. You control one inventor or scientist each, and you race against each other. However, as you increase the number of players, so with 4 players, you get a whole lot more interaction between players, especially during the drafting phase, because you're choosing which cards that will benefit not only you, but will also disadvantage your partner when you pass those sets of cards along. There's a few pros and cons with that. A con is the cards that you pick up in your initial hand, when you pass them along, you won't actually ever see any of those cards again. So a lot of it is more drafted in terms of blocking the player next to you and subsequent players. And same thing when you receive cards that go around the other way. So I guess that's a slight con, but that's where the interaction comes in. Another place where the interaction comes in is in the form of the boost cards, which are really, really great, especially if you've accrued quite a few of those boost cards across the game. You can use them near the end of the game to then slow down all your other players and then gain that extra lead. What I really love about Steampunk Rally is that there's very little downtime between each turn. Each phase is done simultaneously, so when you're playing 7 to 8 plays, each person is doing their actions at the same time. They're either drafting at the same time, venting at the same time, or powering their machines at the same time. So that kind of keeps the momentum of the game going. The other thing that I really like is that the track that you make is customizable and that there's different degrees of difficulty. The game comes with little challenge tokens that can be used to add variation to the game and the particular obstacles that you might have along the way. The other thing that's really, really exciting is that the artwork immerses you in the gameplay. And the final thing that is probably the best thing that I can say about this game is that discovering how your machine works is probably the most exciting thing that you can do. It really fits the theme of exploration and invention. It really allows you to see how the dice can be used to create certain effects and combos. And it can also see whether your drafting has actually worked for you. So not only are you creating this machine, but actually seeing it in operation. There are a few cons to the game, but they're very, very minor in comparison to the pros that I just mentioned. The very, very first con is probably when you're playing with 8 players, and once you get towards the end of the track, your machines are so big that it's very hard to observe and understand how everyone's machine works. So I guess a way around that particular issue is to stagger the gameplay so that you can observe what other people are doing in order to decide what you're going to do in order to help you advance furthest in the game using your machine. The other thing is the dice can sometimes be fiddly, but I actually found that quite a fun aspect to it. The last thing is, if you've got a really big machine, someone can actually be sitting there and powering their dice, discarding their dice, gaining more dice, gaining cogs, gaining movement, and it can actually take quite a long time. So if you're someone with a smaller machine, you can actually sit there for quite a while you're waiting for someone with a giant machine to finish and resolve their action. What I do think that the creators could do in an expansion is possibly introduce some items that you can actually gain throughout the game. So kind of like in Mario Kart where you set traps or things like that to slow other players down. That might be an interesting mechanism for the game designers to explore. The other thing that I'd probably be interested in is probably getting a 4th energy type like green dice where you could have nuclear energy and tying it to the existing game set. And the very last thing I'd probably also like to see is more race tiles so you can have different sorts of races in different environments and seeing how the landscape of those environments might affect the machine. So for example, you could have a tile or a racetrack that's set underwater and some of the machine parts could be used in those water-based environments. That would just really lift the game that extra step. Giving my final verdict for this game, I think Steampunk Rally is a fun game with immense replay value. It's got beautiful artwork, beautiful components. It works really, really well. The dice management and the card drafting aspect flows excellently. It is very appealing to lots of different ages, so if you're a new gamer or a gamer who's got lots of board games on their shelf and you're very experienced, this is a game for anyone and everyone. It is fantastic. I recommend you should get it. If you want to check out my rating at the end of the video, you can have a look at it. This is Danny. Thanks for joining me again for another board game review on Board Game Sanctuary. Bye.